I know you mentioned that you were doing a presentation in Detroit. What's like the furthest that you've gone to do presentations?
Well, I mean, I've gone all sorts of places. I've gone all the way to like LA. I've gone to Prince Edward Island. So those are like two extremes opposite of each other. And I guess all points in between also.
Wow.
So all over the place.
And are these libraries that are contacting you to do presentations, or other sort of farming groups?
Oh yeah, I've done talks for all sorts of groups, Master Gardener organizations, farm conferences, food festivals, all sorts of different stuff. Libraries, most certainly. I do libraries outside of the state also, but many of the libraries that I work with are right here in Michigan. Um, but all sorts of different organizations, garden clubs, you name it.
And are your audiences, are these big audiences, or do they kind of vary?
They vary dramatically.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll do, a small library, a rural library that's essentially like a renovated old house into a library in a, one road community. And you might have like 20 people that come to it or something. And I've done talks in like big auditoriums where there's like, I don't know, 600 people or something I'm talking to. Um, so yeah, it varies a lot. It's all sorts of different stuff, which is kind of the fun of it, really. It's nice to go do different things. I don't do the same thing over and over very well. I like to mix it up. So it's nice to pretty much every day for me is something different.
Wow.
I like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Um, do your presentations involve, are they hands-on, or are there like a visual aspect to it?
Well, sure, and that varies too. Sometimes we'll do presentations, especially like in a large group where it's just a PowerPoint or whatever, and it's me talking and we're looking at, pictures on slides or something. And then sometimes we'll do ones where it's a demonstration where I'll bring things. Whether if we're doing like a seed saving type of thing, sometimes I'll bring a different plant material and process seeds as a demonstration. Or in some groups, we've done hands-on where everybody gets to participate and process seeds together. So it's all sorts of different stuff. We've been doing one lately. It's an herbal tea tasting, and that one has just been very popular. People really love it. And we come together and we talk about the different herbs, and we actually brew three different teas and sample them and talk about everybody's impressions. And I love to do it because I've done it. Oh my gosh, I've probably 100 times we've done this talk, and I've brought the exact same teas every time. Right, it's the same three tea blends, but every group of people experiences it differently, because they're all bringing different perspectives to it. So there's different people smell different things or taste different things or they have different reactions to it, even though it's the same tea every time. So that's extra fun for me. I like to see that. And then there's like a make and take component where people get to make their own tea, their herbal blends to take home. And so they're all different. We kind of customize presentations based around the needs of the venue or the organization that's bringing me in.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Really quick before continuing on, Bevin, I did start recording, and I just wanted to give a proper introduction for everybody out there listening. Hi, my name is Chris. This is Chee-Tash, and today we have a guest on the podcast, Mr. Bevin Cohen. Bevin, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bevin Cohen, and I am the co-owner of Small House Farm, which is a sustainable homestead project in central Michigan.
Nice. And I wanted to actually start off asking you, were you always from Michigan, born and raised?
Yes, absolutely. I was born not even far from where I live right now, actually. So I'm kind of like a local heirloom.
And this area, so this is kind of, would you say it's northern Michigan, not the UP, but north of, Flint and Detroit?
Yeah, we are north of Flint, Detroit. We're pretty much smack right in the middle of the mitten is where we're located. So if I'm going to describe myself geographically, I often say that I'm from central Michigan. But that would be, yeah, the lower peninsula for sure.
Any plans to not be in Michigan, or do you plan on staying in Michigan your whole life?
Oh, I guess I don't know. I there's always dreams. Everybody dreams, oh, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. Right now with the kids, we have two kids here. Our sons are 15 and 10, and they're pretty pretty happy with their friend groups and their schools and their extracurricular activities and stuff. And I wouldn't want to disturb that for them. It's very important, I think, for them to have those routines and relationships. So I wouldn't have any plans to move anytime soon, but maybe after they grow up and move away, who knows? I try not to get in the way of the world around me, and I don't want to be too concrete in my thinking. I like to kind of just let things develop on their own.
So you're saying possible move to maybe Florida and snowbird down there.
Not necessarily that. I did just recently come back from a trip to Ireland, and I thought that that was really beautiful. And that would be a nice place to live, perhaps. I really enjoyed it there. I often joke about moving to Mexico, so I don't really know. Maybe Florida. I wouldn't say no to anything. There's no hard no's, I suppose, but I don't think Florida would be in my top 10 list of places that I would pick. Nothing against Florida. I just don't think it jives necessarily with what I'd be looking for.
Well, have you been to Mexico a lot?
Oh no, I've only actually been to Mexico one time before, but it was beautiful and I loved it. And I've worked with some folks in Mexico through some seed preservation work. So I have some connections down there and some relationships with folks that have been really beneficial. And it's a beautiful culture, and I mean the food is delicious, and yeah, that's important. So no, I've only been there like the one time, but it's always in the back of my mind how much fun it was and how much I'd like to go back sometime.
Oh, what area of Mexico was this?
We went to the Yucatan Peninsula. So we'd flown into Cancun area because of all the tourists there, it's a inexpensive place to get to. Because there's a lot of flights in and out. So the Yucatan Peninsula, but we went, and we visited some small villages and had dinner with some folks. And of course, we went to go see the ruins. That was the highlight of the whole thing, of course, was going to see the ruins. We got in a bus tour that we had rented. It was essentially, I think it was just like a Volkswagen bus. And we paid the guy, and he kind of drove us around and took us to see the sights and stuff. And it was super fun.
These is it called Chichen Itza?
Yeah, we went there. Yep. That was one of the places that we visited. Um, it was really cool. It's just cool to see. And that was just a thing like I said, we were just in Ireland, is to see these old buildings, these old structures. It, it just boggles the mind to think about how old some of these buildings are, to try to put that into relation to something. We went to a place in Ireland that was 1100 years old. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. But like, really, what does that even mean? Like, my brain can't even quite comprehend exactly how old 1100 years is. But it's impressive, I tell you what. And here in the United States, it seems that we're always trying to modernize everything. We're taking down the old and replacing it with something new, and we just don't seem to have that in any way. Obviously, you know, it's a much newer country, I guess, but we don't seem to have that respect for old things in the same way that they do in other places. Other cultures really respect those traditions, and I think there's something to be said for that. It's powerful to remember and respect the past. I think it helps us make more informed decisions for the future.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Your town that you're from and that you currently live in Michigan, how rural is it?
Well, so I was born in Midland, was the city, and I wouldn't say that it's necessarily rural. I mean, it's a town, it's a city, but you know, it's a small town. It's definitely a small town. And, we live now in Sanford, which is a much smaller, it's a village outside of the same county, different town. And it's relatively rural. I mean, there's a lot of farming going on around here, which is really nice. I don't know what the population is in Midland, so I can't try to make a guess at that, but small town USA, I guess you could call it.
And the farms that you are surrounded by or that are close by you right now, what are they mainly farming?
Well, what you're going to see the most of, I suppose, driving around is going to be, commodity farms. You'll see, cornfields and soybean fields and that sort of thing. But I think that the reason that that stands out is just because of the scale of those types of farms. They're easy to identify because it's a large, sprawling field of something. But interspersed throughout all of that, and that's the thing that I love about where I live, is that there are so many small farmers. There's a lot of small farms around here that are producing some wonderful produce, fruits and vegetables, all sorts of great stuff. And there's a thriving farmers market community all around here. Every little town seems to have a thriving farmers market where these farmers could come and bring their produce and connect with their communities. And it's a really cool thing to see. And so there's a lot of that. It might not be visible to somebody who's not, if you're just driving through, all you're going to see is that big cornfield. But if you stopped and took a moment to get to know the folks, there's a lot of cool little farms around here, and it's really nice to see.
I'm curious about those large commodity farms. Are those farms run by one person or one family, or is that something that like a company owns and does that?
Well, I couldn't say for sure, but I would guess that probably a combination of both of those. I bet there's some very large corporate farms that are running some things, and I think some are some very large, well-established family farms that have been here for a very long time that have just grown to that scale that that's the type of agriculture that makes sense for them economically to continue. Once you reach a certain scale and you have that much, acreage and you have that large of equipment, then you're kind of stuck in a way having to grow everything forever at that scale because that's the system that you built for yourself.
And you mentioned that you have a homestead. Is that the same thing as having a farm, or are those two different vocabulary words there?
Well, that's a good question, Chris. You see the word homestead used a lot anymore. You see it tagged onto a lot of different things. Some of that might even just be marketing that people are doing. But a homestead, to me, I suppose, is more of a self-sustaining unit. Whereas with a homestead, we may take items to a market to sell, but selling items at a market isn't our top priority. Our top priority may be trying to be a little bit more sufficient, self-sufficient in the things that we do here, a little more self-contained, where we are trying to build a home here, less dependent on the woes of the economy around us, if that makes sense.
And when did you start your homestead, or is that something that you need to designate to, the governing bodies of the state, or do you just say, "Hey, we have a homestead now"?
Well, so we purchased this place in 2013 and kind of set up shop doing what we're doing here the following year, I think we moved in here like in October, and then by the next spring we kind of, hit the ground running with the things that we were doing here. Whether or not there's like a regulatory body, if you have to, I don't know, if I'm aware of a licensing to be a homesteader or whatever it might be. I don't necessarily subscribe to those necessities. So it's not something that I could probably get into the details with because that's a great question that I don't know the answer to.
Oh no, no worries at all. And I forget earlier, in the interview, I forget if you mentioned how big your homestead is, like as far as acreage.
Our property here is just shy of 3.5 acres. And we're on a dead end dirt road. And across the street from us is 1,100 acres of state land, which is just really nice to have. It's peaceful and it's quiet. And it's really a blessing, to have something like that, to be able to have that abundance of nature right outside of our door is a really, really cool thing.
Compared to some of the other places surrounding you, is that bigger or smaller compared to the other homestead or farms around you?
Well, I think there's homesteads of all sizes. Everybody's, got something different going on. I've seen some incredible setups on significantly smaller pieces of property, just some amazing situations. And then of course there's folks, I think the guy just right to the west of me, I think he's got 30, 40 acres over there, So it's all different sizes and shapes. And that's kind of the beauty of homesteading, I guess you could call it, or the beauty of just even gardening or trying to do it yourself or whatever lingo we want to use, is that it's scalable for every model. Like every person, regardless of the space that you have, has the opportunity to try to grow something for themselves, to produce their own, and we could say maybe be a part of the solution.
Well, and how much do you grow on your homestead, or what kinds of plants, fruits, vegetables, crops, etc., are you growing on it?
We grow a lot of stuff here, Chris. It gets pretty hectic, for sure. We grow all of your classics, fruits and vegetables that you have on a farm, tomatoes and peppers and cabbages and all that kind of stuff. A lot of what we do here, though, is seed production. We grow a lot of seed. So the seed is for historical preservation. Some of it's for wholesale to seed companies. We also have a retail seed company online at smallhousefarm.com where we sell the seeds that we produce. So that's a big part of what we do here is growing seed. So that makes it a little busy sometimes. Seeds kind of tend to come in all at the same time sometimes, and it can get pretty hectic even in the small scale that we're working in. And we also grow quite a bit of herbs. So one of the things when we started Small House Farm, kind of the cornerstone of our business was cold pressing seed and nut oil, which is, kind of out in left field, I suppose. I haven't met a lot of people doing it. And so we were cold pressing these seed and nut oils and then taking the oils and herbs that we would grow here at the farm or gather from the wild. We do a lot of foraging and we kind of would combine these things and crafted a full line of herbal health and wellness products. And we used to, in the early days, peddle those at farmers markets. That was a big part of what we did. And then in March of 2020, something happened where we weren't able to do that anymore. And so we kind of had to pivot our business and we moved that also into an online store, just like we do with our seeds. And it's been very successful for us. So we've continued to do that, even though now, farmers markets are back up and running and doing great. We don't vend at them. I still shop at all of them every opportunity I have, but we don't really vend at them anymore. Like I said, everything's online now. But I guess to answer your question, we also grow a lot of herbs along with the fruits and vegetables here at Small House.
Now, when I hear you say you like growing seeds, to me, I always just think, oh, seeds are you have an apple tree and there's seeds in the apple. So this you have seeds from the apples that you grow, but you are specifically cultivating or producing seeds.
Yes. And much like with, I suppose, your apple analogy, a lot of the seeds that we grow are encased in fruits that we want to consume, right? So we'll grow tomatoes, and ultimately, my final goal is to harvest those tomato seeds uh, for retail. But in order to do so, I also have to harvest and eat those tomatoes. What a bummer, right? So a lot of the produce, it's food for us as well as seed production. Um, and other crops, we'd say maybe like lettuce, those types of things that as a consumable produce, we eat the lettuce well before it's even flowered, let alone make seed. So in situations like that, sometimes we have to sacrifice eating the lettuce in order to give it time to produce seed. So we've got the seed to grow. So some things we're growing to eat and get seed, something we're growing just for the seed.
I see. Okay. What would you say is the hardest thing to grow on your homestead?
Well, gosh, that's an interesting question. Some of the hardest things to grow. Now, we're kind of tucked away in the woods. So we are limited in the amount of space that we have that's full sun for growing. And a lot of crops that we want to grow and seeds that are popular for folks to purchase are crops that require full sun. So we would think of things, of course, like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, corn, melon, squash, cucumbers, those types of things. They require a lot of sun. But some of those crops also take up a lot of space. So one of the greatest challenges that we have is kind of deciding how much of this full sun space do we want to dedicate to crop A, and how much space are we going to have left over for crop B? And sometimes we have to make some cuts. So in recent years, we've actually stopped completely growing corn. We don't grow corn anymore because it takes up a significant amount of space, and it just wasn't adding up for us to keep corn in the rotation because I found that I could produce a lot more in that same space if I chose other crops. So full sun crops are definitely the greatest challenge that we have here just because we have a limited amount of space for that. Whereas things that are partial sun or shade, like a lot of brassicas and lettuces and mustards and kales, that sort of thing. I mean, I got endless space for that. So those are very easy and we grow a lot of that. We've really in recent years started to lean into what can we do with what we have instead of how can we change the situation to make it easier to do the things we want, if that makes sense. Instead of trying to bend Mother Nature to my will, I've decided that it's easier to actually work with Mother Nature. And at the end, it's more productive, it's less work, and everybody's happier, it seems like.
Now, on the flip side, and you might have just mentioned it there, what are the easiest things to grow on your homestead? I know you just mentioned like kale as an example. Is that something that's very easy to grow?
Very easy to grow. In the last few years, I've really gotten into Asian greens. We do a lot of work with a company called Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. I help with their catalog. We developed over the years a very nice relationship. And Jer Gettle, the owner of the company, is really into Asian greens. That's one of his personal preferences. He really gets excited about. So, in turn, the catalog offers a wide variety of different types of greens from Asia. And I've started to grow those, and they perform very well for us here. They seem to really love our little microclimate. So they're very easy for us. They're incredibly nutritious. There's a ton of diversity. There's so many different things to choose from to grow. That's so much fun. So that's something that really is easy to grow here. It's good for us, and we all seem to really enjoy it. And at the end of the day, Chris, it's all about what you enjoy, right? I think that's one of the most important lessons that we can learn from the garden. We learn a lot of lessons from the garden, of course, patience probably being number one. How to accept defeat would be number two. But learning how to have fun and to go with the things that are fun in life. Life at the end of the day is really about pleasure. What do you got, 60, 70, 80 years if you're lucky? We should spend most of that doing something that we enjoy.
Yeah, amen to that. Um, you mentioned corn as something that you used to grow and you don't. Is that when you make those types of decisions? Is that something that's easy to bring back if you ever, someday you decide, hey, we want to grow corn again? Is that easy to re-implement into your homestead?
Well, I mean, physically, yes, it would be a very easy thing to implement. I just have to make that decision and plant those seeds. Really, where the difficulty lies in that sort of decision is convincing everyone here that we want to do it, I guess. For leading up to when we decided to stop growing corn, my wife was a proponent of stopping the corn years before we actually did it because she already saw the writing on the wall that it wasn't making sense for us to do. And I stubbornly held on to it for a couple of more years, trying to make it work for us economically. And at the end of the day, believe it or not, like always, she was right. And so I think if I was going to say, oh, I want to grow corn again, I'm going to have a really nice PowerPoint to present to her to really convince her that it's the right way to go. And that would be the difficulty. Physically, it's just planting seeds, which I mean, people have been planting corn for, I mean, practically 10,000 years at this point. So it's something everybody could do. But, you know, you know how it is.
Yeah. with with what you grow, does everything follow a certain schedule? Are there some things that you grow at only this time of year and then other things you have to grow at like a completely like different month or part of the year?
Sure. So some of the crops that we grow are warm weather crops. And I rattled off the list. I'll do it again. So things like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers, squash, melons, those types of things. They're not frost tolerant at all. So they're warm weather crops. So they can only be grown really during the summer. That's when they're going to thrive. But a lot of our cool weather crops, which happen to be shade loving crops as well. So those are the ones we do a lot of now. Things like lettuce and spinach and broccoli and kale. They prefer to grow in the spring and then again in the fall. They like that cool weather. They can't handle the heat of summer. So we'll do two separate plantings and harvestings of those crops. Again, one in the spring and one in the fall. And we also grow quite a bit of garlic here. And garlic is something that we plant in the fall that stays in over winter. And then the following summer is when we harvest it. So that's like a completely different schedule than everything else. But it's kind of nice because at the end of the year, when everything's pretty much wrapping it up, we still got something we can go out and plant. And that's kind of fun.
And continuing along that, so in that part of year, once it does become winter, especially up here in Michigan, it's getting pretty cold. Is does that mean operations for the most part start to really ramp down?
Those particular tasks will, once the frost comes and all of our warm weather crops are done, then, as the season moves from fall into winter and a lot of the seeds are done, and they're coming in and they're being harvested, then we kind of move into a different phase of operations, right? Then there becomes a lot of processing. Now, some things, a lot of fresh fruits like melons and tomatoes, we harvest those seeds right away. right? As we're eating the fruit, we're harvesting and processing those seeds. But other things kind of stick around for a while. Like we do a lot of beans here, a lot of bean seed. So we collect those as they dry down. We'll collect them throughout the end of the year. Brassicas, herbs, a lot of herbs, those sorts of things. And they kind of come into the pole barn, into the processing center. And then throughout the winter time, we're busy cleaning and processing, threshing and winnowing seed to get it ready for sale in the spring.
Okay. Now, earlier you had mentioned being self-sustaining, and I was just wondering, how does that mean, like, do you ever need to go out for like pretty anything at all, or do you pretty much have everything you need right there where you live?
Oh no, I have to go out quite often. And I think that when we say self-sustaining, and I was trying to use that term as to differentiate homesteading from just farming. But in reality, I mean, I think self-sustaining, fully self-sustainable living is practically a myth anymore. I don't think that really works for anybody. I don't know if it's even good for anybody. I think community sustainability is far more important. Like all of us working together to do something is going to be easier and I think more fruitful for everyone when we work together. And there's some things I like. I like coffee. I drink coffee. I like avocados. There's certain things that I'm going to want to do here that there's just no way that I could ever produce myself anyways. And so I'm going to have to, I guess bite the bullet and go and get them. But as often as possible, if we could produce something here or get it produced locally, that's really important to do. If I can get something that my neighbor's making or somebody down the road or in the next town over is really good at supporting them is just as important as doing it myself. I think to me those things are almost equal. So at the end of the day, it's community sustainability, that local mindset I think is very important for all of us, even in the smallest of steps. Just the smallest choice to buy local just once. I think there's a lot of power to that.
That reminds me of an interview I was listening to the owner of, I believe his farm is called White Oak Pastures, and he does grass-fed beef, pork, chicken, I believe even maybe eggs and dairy too. And he said that his goal is to spark somebody across the country to do what he's doing. And he's got a very big operation and he sells his products pretty much all over the country. But he said that he would prefer it if somebody who's buying his product in what have you, Idaho or California, he would prefer it if you buy from somebody in Idaho or California, not from him. And it kind of speaks to what you're saying with community sustainability and, buying locally, local stuff that's produced.
Absolutely. With all the educational work that we do here, we go out and try to teach people about how to grow their own food or how to save their own seeds or how to forage herbs or craft their own herbal products and that sort of thing. And I always say, ultimately my goal here is to put myself out of business, right? You shouldn't need to buy these things from me. You should be able to make it yourself. You shouldn't, once you learn this skill, then you should be able to apply it to your own life. You don't need to come and learn it again or whatever, So ultimately, yes, if we can get other people to do these things, to learn how beneficial, or in some cases, how actually very simple it is to do a lot of these things, then yeah, I guess that's the ultimate goal. So I would totally agree with that guy. We have customers that buy our stuff all over the country as well. This now with this online platform, we sell products all over the place, and that's cool. That's all right. I don't mind that, I suppose. But ultimately, yeah, if these folks could learn how to save their own seeds, so they don't have to buy them from me, and that's what I tell them. The seeds that you save from your garden are going to do better for you than the seeds that you buy from me. Buy seeds from me to get yourself started and then save them. You should only have to buy them from me once, you know, not to dissuade return customers because we offer different varieties every year. But the point is, this is something that everybody should be focused on learning how to do themselves.
Do you ever have people say to you, not that they're afraid, but it's almost, afraid's the wrong word, but maybe like they lack confidence because they see this, like what you do, as very daunting or complex, or they just like, oh, I can't, I could never do that? Like, do you have people that come up to you and say things like that?
All the time. Absolutely. I think it's like almost human nature to be afraid or unsure of, insecure about things that we don't properly understand. Sure, right? If you don't know it, it seems like it could be a daunting task to learn this. This is a lot of different things I've got to learn, that to accomplish this skill. Yes, and I always like to tell people it's kind of like riding a bike, right? When you don't know how to ride a bike, it seems incredibly daunting and scary. And oh my gosh, how does that even work? And what's going to happen to me if I try it? But once you ride a bike, it's actually pretty simple to do. And it turns out it's a ton of fun. And you're not going to ever want to stop doing it, right? It's just like that.
Nice. Yeah, I totally get that analogy. I do martial arts, and that reminds me of like when I first started doing martial arts. Super scary. I was always getting beat up, and now I know a little bit more now after a few
Yeah,
years.
it's exactly like that. And at the time when we first moved here to Small House and first started having those conversations with folks, I was actively teaching my youngest son how to ride his bike. So that was why that analogy came to mind because I saw it in real time how anxious he was about the unknown. And then as soon as he ventured into trying it, I mean, now you can't get this kid off his bike.
Now, the seeds that you produce, I kind of get a sense that because I saw that you have or you're involved with some co-ops, and is this kind of like people coming together to trade things that they have with things that they don't have, almost like you're trading, baseball cards or something like that, and maybe not seeds but herbs? Is that kind of what a co-op involves?
In many ways, yes. A cooperative, it functions on a lot of different levels. Probably your listeners would be most familiar with like a cooperative grocery store, which is a little bit different than a cooperative like seed exchange, which is something that we do a lot here, actually. We organize a pretty large seed swap. And that's, I like the baseball card analogy. I never thought of it that way, but that's pretty much what it is. Folks all come together with the seeds that they've grown from their garden, and you share them with people. You're like, hey, oh, I like the seeds you got. Let's make a swap. So then you can try somebody else's bean and they can take your tomato or whatever it might be. And it's fun because it gives us opportunities to try new things. But also, what it does is it helps disperse these seeds around, so it makes these varieties more available to other people. A lot of the seed work that we do here at Small House is the preservation of old heirloom varieties. So a lot of these times they're historic seeds, they have a lineage that you could trace back for multiple generations. And in order to ensure the preservation of these seeds, the greatest thing that I feel that we can do is to just share them with people, to get more people growing them. I can grow it myself and I can put it in the freezer and it'll last a very long time. Sure, but that's only going to go so far. And if we could just get more seeds into the hands of more people, that's how you ensure that these seeds are preserved, these histories and stories are preserved, but also we help folks get out into the garden. Getting into the garden is the goal here, right? So we get more people growing more stuff, and boy, that checks a lot of boxes. That's a win-win for sure.
And the seeds that you mentioned that you press into oils, is that something that you need heavy duty machinery to do?
Well, not necessarily. So when we got started, cold pressing oil, we got a machine. I mean, it's metal. It's steel. It was from Holland. It's handcrafted in Holland, but it's essentially just three parts. It's the main body of the machine. It's a turn screw that goes inside of it, and then the crank handle, and it's hand turned. You clamp it onto a tabletop and you crank it by hand. You could compare it, I suppose, to like a meat grinder almost, right? Same kind of thing. And you load the seeds in there and you crank it by hand. And we pressed oil in that thing for years. Eventually, we upgraded to an electronic machine, electric, motorized unit just for larger scale because of the scale, the amount of oil that we were pressing for a long time there. And that worked just fine. But I tell folks for household use, this hand cranked machine is perfectly fine. And we offer them on our website. You can actually get the press directly through us on our website, the brand that we recommend, the sturdiest one, the hand turn machine. And then in 2022, I published a book. It's called The Complete Guide to Seed and Nut Oils. We did it with New Society Publishers in British Columbia, and it's essentially a guide to all of these different seeds that you can grow or forage that can be pressed into oils. So it walks you through the entire process. I show you how I've taken the hand turn press and I've hooked it up to a motor. I've hooked it up to a bicycle so you can make it pedal powered, all these tips and tricks. Because when I started pressing oil, 10, 12 years ago, there wasn't any literature on it anywhere. I couldn't find any information. I scoured the internet. I could barely find anything. There just wasn't a lot of data out there to help me through the process. So there was a huge learning curve to it. So I was really excited when New Society asked me about doing this book because this creates a situation now where other folks that might be interested in trying it, they don't have to go through all the mistakes that I went through over 10 years. They can kind of learn from all my mistakes in one reading of this book, and then they can hit the ground running and press in their own oil. Because I think that's important. Everybody's really into local food. Local food, that's a big thing. But we don't really often talk about the staples of the kitchen when we talk about local food. And if you think about how often you might utilize oil in the kitchen, whether it's making salad dressings or sauteing veggies or whatever, it's a staple food. And how can you have a local food movement without, local staple foods? So I think press and oil is something that more people should be talking about because, again, it's simple. It may seem daunting if you don't know anything about it, but it's actually pretty simple and everybody can and probably should try doing it sometime.
So, and as far as these seed oils, are we talking this is, like sunflower oil, canola oil, almond oil, hemp oil, like those types?
Absolutely right. We press a beautiful hemp seed oil. We get the hemp seeds from an organic farmer who's, I mean, a 10-minute drive from here. And it's just decadent, delicious hemp seed oil. You can utilize it in the kitchen as a cold culinary oil, but it's also great topically. And that's an important aspect of utilizing these oils. We use them in a number of our small house products, right? They're in our lotions and salves and that sort of thing. Yep, hemp seed oil is a big one. We've done flaxseed oil, sunflower oil, um, almond oil, walnut oil. I mean, black walnuts grow aplenty all over the place. They're all over the place. Let your friends know you're interested in black walnuts, and you'll get buckets of them just left on your porch. I promise you. More walnuts than you'll know what to do with. And you can press them into a delicious, nutritious oil just with a few, cranks of the machine.
Now, this is kind of a funny question I have to ask. The hemp oil, if you consume that, are you getting any of the psychoactive effects as you would if you smoke cannabis or something like that?
I would be able to charge a lot more money for it if I could. No, actually, in a few years back, was it 2017 or 18? We won a Good Food Award for our hemp seed oil. And as part of the award certification process, we had to have the oil analyzed for a number of things. And one of the things was the THC. And it came back at 0.01% THC because it's naturally occurring in all parts of the plant, but in such a small quantity that it's certainly not recreational by any means.
Okay, nice. um, now, are there any homesteads around you that do any sort of livestock farming, or is that something that's just completely like a whole different animal? No pun intended there, but is it like just a whole entirely different operation?
Well, I mean, as far as like your day-to-day chores, yeah, absolutely it would be different than, vegetable farming. But yes, there are many folks around here that are doing animals on a small scale. Chickens, most certainly. I know some folks that are doing goats, sheep, cattle, that sort of thing, for sure. Now, to be a truly, we'll use the word again, sufficient, self-sufficient homestead or whatever, I mean, having some sort of livestock, large or small, is a part of that, right? To be able to feed yourself in as many ways as possible. And we've got chickens here, and and they produce eggs, and then there's chickens for meat and that sort of thing. Years ago, we experimented with pigs here, and we did raise pigs for a couple of years, which was quite an adventure for sure. We don't really have enough space to do pigs properly, to give them the space that they need. So we don't do that anymore. But we did experiment with it. And I thought, gosh, if I'm going to eat, meat, I should try raising meat. So I think that that's part of, being a responsible consumer. So we did do it, and it was an incredible amount of work, but it was super fun. It was really cool experience. Um, but it's not something that I'll be able to do again with the space that we've got here. It to keep the pigs happy, they deserve more space than we're able to give them, I think. So we don't really do that anymore. But short answer, yes, absolutely. There's homesteaders doing all sorts of cool stuff. And what's nice about those sorts of things is that when we think of homesteading, or if we think about being self-sufficient, or if we think about doing it yourself, or whatever we want to call it, we often think about, oh, I'm going to grow produce and sell produce at the market, or I'm going to raise animals and have them butchered and sell meat, you know. But some of these things also offer value added opportunities, right? So these are things in addition to. So when you've got goats, a lot of the folks that I know that have goats, they're not even selling goat meat, although I wish that they would so I could buy it and eat it because it's delicious. But more often, they're actually making goat milk products. Goat milk soap and that sort of thing, or folks with sheep are offering wool or whatever it might be. Or even us, when we're growing produce, my value added product is actually the seeds, right? We're selling the seeds, or we're taking the herbs and then turning them into balms and lotions and that sort of thing. So we're kind of, you could say, thinking outside the box. We're kind of approaching the commercial aspects of what we can produce in a little bit a different sort of way.
Now, with your presentations that you do you also get people coming up to you saying, "Hey, I I don't have the space. I don't even have a house. I actually just have an apartment." Is living or growing things still possible to do when you're in that sort of different housing situation?
Oh, absolutely. So the first answer, yes, people bring that up to me all the time. And two, yes, you can certainly do many things. You can grow things in a south-facing window. You can grow things on your balcony if you've got one. You can get some grow lights in your house and grow some stuff. They sell all sorts of different little hydroponic grow light little contraptions that you can get so you can grow your own herbs right outside your kitchen, right in your house. And yeah, there's many, many things that we can do. You know what I mean? I mean, even if you, for some, are unable to acquire these grow lights, because everybody's got a different situation, and you don't find yourself in a situation that you can grow your own food, you can most certainly lean into sourcing your food as locally as possible and supporting that local economy. And that's just as good, really. Doing what you can where you can is important, composting your stuff. A lot of larger cities now even have composting programs. You know what I mean? So along with your garbage and recycling, you can even have your scraps composted. And that's a huge thing that you should be able to do. If you have that opportunity, take it, and that's pretty cool, it's just a little bit about finding a baby step. What little thing can you do and then do it? I was raised by my grandmother, and we lived in an apartment, on the edge of town, and we would grow stuff in flower pots on the balcony. I was a little kid. I loved radishes as a little kid, which I don't know if many other kids liked radishes, but I was really into radishes as a kid. And I would grow all these radishes all on the balcony, as a little boy, and it was super fun. Radishes are fun for kids, because they're so quick. So you get a harvest pretty quick, so you're not waiting too long. But, I was doing it, and I think I kind of like planted those seeds, if you will, of the love of growing plants, like at an early age, being able to use that sunny little corner of my balcony. I was able to just that one, you know, little spot, and I was able to, what I produced was far greater than the radishes themselves, I guess you could say.
And forgive me, composting you mentioned. What exactly is that?
So composting is essentially, you could take like your kitchen scraps, right? So all your organic material that comes out of your kitchen, banana peels, coffee grounds, pepper stems, whatever it might be, all your leftover scraps. And instead of throwing them in the trash or throwing them in the garbage disposal or whatever, you can break them down. So here at home, we save our kitchen scraps. We have a compost pile where essentially they sit somewhere outside, and they eventually will become dirt. They'll decompose and become very nutritious soil. And so, folks that live in cities that may not have the ability to have a compost pile like we have, there are services that'll actually pick up all of your organic material and take it somewhere and have it processed essentially and have it turned into soil. That's awesome. You throw something like that in the trash, something that would just break down naturally. but you wrap it up in a plastic bag and throw it in the trash, I mean, it's going to last 1,000 years. What a waste. What a waste.
Now, this is really good because this leads to my next question about soil and some people and some things that I've read about how the soil that we have today isn't, according to them, necessarily as, I guess, nutrient dense, or it doesn't have the same minerals or nutrients for plants as it did, many, many years ago. And there's some people sounding an alarm about uh, topsoil erosion. And I was wondering if, have you heard any of those things or have you faced any of those challenges with what you do?
Well, what you're talking about, Chris, relates most to large scale agriculture. And in these large scale agricultural scenes that are very heavily chemical dependent on keeping nutrients in the soil. And yes, this is certainly an issue. You know, these larger scale farmers that utilize these synthetic chemicals in their farms, high nitrogen, synthetic fertilizers, and these sorts of things to supplement what the plants aren't able to get is one part of a two-part problem. So by utilizing these chemicals, by putting these chemicals into the soil, they're killing the natural microbial systems that would exist in that soil. And then by growing monoculture crops, and by that I mean one species as far as the eye can see. So think of a commercial cornfield, and it is only corn in every direction. There's nothing else that's allowed to grow there, right? When you grow produce in this sort of a way, you're limiting the ability of the soil to thrive the way that it would in nature, right? Nature requires a lot of different inputs and outputs in order for it to build healthy soil. So our modern agricultural system has stripped the soil of its nutrients. It's tried to replace them with synthetic chemicals that don't even stay in the soil for as long as they probably should. There's a lot of nitrogen runoff that happens in these farms that causes algae blooms. It's a big thing like in the Gulf of Mexico, these algae blooms and things that are being caused by runoff from farm fields into the Mississippi River. It's a whole thing. We won't get into that. But what we will say is now let's come to here at Small House Farm and come look at my soil. My soil is significantly healthier and more nutritious than it was when I came to this property, right? When I came to this property, the people that own this property before me behind the pole barn was where they essentially stored like junk car parts. You know what I mean? It was kind of like a mini junkyard going on here. Not great. The soil was pretty barren. It was dry. It was rough. Okay. Now, over the years of being here, by adding organic material to the soil, we've been able to build up a vibrant, healthy ecosystem in the soil, which is what our plants need to thrive. I don't need to utilize synthetic chemical inputs in my garden. Nature's able to provide it themselves because I've taken the time to nourish the soil with the organic compounds that it needs. And this is something that happens if we visited small farms and these little homesteaders and these types of folks. That's what they are doing. They're building their soil. These soil complaints that we're seeing, these issues, that's the result of large scale agriculture. And it is a concern. But it's also important to note that when you think about the millions of acres of corn that are being grown in the United States, most of that is not for direct human consumption, anyways, right? A large chunk of that is for ethanol production, and an even larger chunk of that is for cattle feed, to feed to cattle, which eventually becomes food for us. But we dedicate millions of acres of agricultural production to something that isn't even directly consumable for humans. And that to me seems like an unusual use of resources.
Yeah, I would say the same. Um, would you say then, are you then able to say your products are organic, or is that something that you have to like take an extra step to like put that label your stuff as organic?
To be able to legally label my stuff as organic, I need to be organically certified, which is through the USDA. And there's a process and licensing or whatever that goes into that. You know, it costs money and inspections and this sort of thing. And we are not USDA certified organic. Although we do grow things following what would be considered all the organic standards, we are not technically certified. And that's an interesting conversation too, right? Like, I have to pay money for my food to be legally organic. but folks that use synthetic chemicals on their plants don't need to pay a license to do that, right? That's an interesting, choice that we've made for our food system, you know. But that being said, to me, it doesn't matter. And I don't mean organic versus conventional, which is what they call non-organic. I don't mean that that doesn't matter. What I mean is the certification doesn't really matter. If we buy locally, where we have the opportunity to meet the farmers, talk to the people that are growing our food, to develop that relationship with the producers and providers of our food system, that's far more important to me than a government regulated sticker. You know what I mean? I want to know the farmer. I want to know what they're doing and that personal connection to our food, to how our food is being produced, to me is far more valuable than, I mean, you go to the grocery store and buy something organic. Where's it coming from? Who's even growing it? Well, you don't even know. Um, that's not the way I want to do things, I guess.
Yeah, it really seems like it would be much more of a headache to go down that route and to, jump through hoops and like you said, pay, some I'm guessing expensive fees to be able to label your stuff that way. Yeah, it just seems like there would be a lot more headaches along the way.
Well, yeah, and those folks that are organically certified, I don't want to bash what they're doing by any means, but there's a lot more paperwork that goes along with that because every step of the way, you have to make sure that you're following these stipulations, to ensure that you're properly certified, which is cool. That's great. And the folks that are willing to take the time to do that are proving that they really believe in organic agriculture, which is important. Their customer base knows for sure that they're getting something quality. That's important. You know what I mean? Um, the folks that are organically certified then are able to charge more for their produce because there's more of an expense that goes into it, so that the price is higher on those things, so they're able to get more for their tomatoes than a non-certified organic farmer could. So there's positives to it for sure. But at the end of the day, I suppose, and maybe this is just me being, a bitter old guy, is I don't think that we should rely on government regulation to tell us what food is healthy. I think we should rely on our neighbors for that.
I know at the beginning you mentioned how you've traveled and done presentations across the country. I was just wondering, how does Michigan compare for farming and growing crops, plants, etc., to other states? Do we have like a pretty good situation here in Michigan as compared to other states?
We have a fantastic situation, actually. We are number two in the nation behind California for agricultural diversity. We are able to grow a larger spectrum of crops than any other state aside from California, due to our wonderful soil and our beautiful environment. So we're doing really well. And the farmers market movement in Michigan is unbeatable. It's the support that our farmers get from their communities is unreal. It's amazing. So no, we have it really good here in Michigan. We do. And I don't know if everybody even realizes how good they have it. Sometimes you don't know how good you got it,
Yeah.
right? But no, Michigan is top notch. And I'm biased as all get out. I think Michigan is the best of all the states, but the facts remain that we are number two for agricultural diversity, and that is pretty awesome.
Yeah, wow, very cool. I didn't know that. Um, I only have just like one, maybe two more questions, Bevin. And this one, it's funny because I actually just did another interview yesterday with somebody who does climate change presentations and does something similar to you. He goes across the state, across the country, giving these presentations. And I was just wondering if that sort of thing has affected the way that you do things on your homestead.
Are you asking if climate change has affected me?
Yeah, and like if it's affected at all, like what you grow or like the timing of things when you grow them, or maybe it hasn't affected it at all that you notice.
Oh, it has affected it most certainly. And climate change is a good term for it. I think it'd be more appropriate almost to call it climate chaos because it's unpredictable. A change makes me feel like you know what's coming, and it's almost impossible to say what's coming as far as the climate or even the way that it affects our day-to-day weather is unusual. It's certainly been warming up much sooner in the year than it has in years past, and I'm talking like in these last 4 or 5 years, it's been noticeably warmer earlier and it's remained warmer longer, which is great in many ways when we're thinking about trying to grow things in Michigan. All of a sudden, I have a much longer season than I used to. The USDA agricultural map that they release for the zones, and you could be, and it's based on your frost dates and temperatures and such. Um, we've always been zone 5B as long as I've lived here, and this year they released a new map, and I am now in zone 6A. So my agricultural USDA zone has changed because of climate chaos, right? So that's a notable difference. Also, the weather is incredibly unpredictable. My last frost date should typically be around October 15th. And a couple years ago, we had a surprise freezing event at September 15th, a month early, and we lost a ton of stuff. That was completely unexpected, and then it's never happened again. We had what was called the 100-year flood one year. It rained so much, it was like 14 inches overnight. It rained so much that my home was an island and it was called the 100-year flood, right? This only has dramatic event will only happen 100 years. 2 years later, it happened again. There was so much rain and flooding here in 2020 that our dam gave out in our village, and most of the village of Sanford was completely washed away. And the lake is gone, and they haven't even finished rebuilding it yet. That was quite a scene for our local economy. And then we have this thing where it will rain nonstop, where you think you're going to get another flood, and then you don't see rain again for 2 months, and it's a drought. So yes, there is definitely real time on the ground things happening that are very noticeable to our climate right now. And I can only imagine that it's going to get more unpredictable. Um, and we'll see what that means for folks. I have a friend in Georgia, who started to grow oranges and things. And they, 15 years ago couldn't grow oranges in Georgia. But they can now. So if we try to look at the positives of it like that, I guess that's all right. But the unpredictability of it, I'm such a small scale producer, and it has affected me dramatically at times that we can only imagine on a larger scale the impact that that could have. And when we consider how much most people rely on a very fragile food system for their survival, I mean, we're just one disaster away from a real bad scene, man, for sure.
To use the orange example, maybe could it be possible then in a few years' time you could grow avocados just here in Michigan?
Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
And maybe, I guess, you never know. Um, th that would be something. That would that's looking at the bright side things for sure. That's looking at the silver lining, Chris. Maybe someday we could. We're lucky to be here in Michigan because we've got all this fresh water. And I think that's going to play a big part in our future as well. So I'm thankful to be here. So maybe even after the kids move away, I might just stay right here in Michigan after all.
One final question for you, Bevin. I'm curious because I see these at bookstores and book stands, what have you, the Farmer's Almanac. And I was wondering, is that something that you utilize?
I don't really dig into the Farmer's Almanac too much, although I have friends that do, and they have great success following the Farmer Almanac advice. And if we were to flip through Farmer's Almanacs, older ones, and then compare them to these newer ones, I would guess that some of that advice has certainly changed over the years as things have changed around us. But I think that the Farmer's Almanac is a great resource for folks, especially people that are maybe new to growing their own food or new to agriculture in some form, or whatever it might be. That's a great place to find some true and tested advice to help them get started on their journey for sure.
Well, and is that just like a how-to guide?
Well, there's some how-to stuff in there. There's some weather maps in there, planting guides, some anecdotes, and that sort of thing from old farmers. There's all sorts of different stuff in there. It's it's a wealth of knowledge, some would say, right? There's a lot of different tidbits of useful information that you could find. Even just planting guides alone for somebody that's new to gardening is incredibly helpful. You know, it can be overwhelming to get into this, you know, like, well, when do I start my seeds and when do I transplant and this and that and the other thing? And just to have, you know, the Farmer's Almanac, who's been doing it for a long time, just helping you know when to start your seeds, that, you know, it takes a lot of stress off your shoulders and that makes gardening more enjoyable. Which brings me back to my point from earlier. Everything that you're doing should be enjoyable. And the Farmer's Almanac might help folks find a more enjoyable way to grow their own food.
And with that, I think that's a good place to end. Bevin, thank you very much for doing this and answering my questions. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
One final thing for people to get in contact with you. I know you have your websites. Are you on social media at all?
We are on Instagram and Facebook, and we've got a YouTube and a Patreon and all that good stuff. And folks can find the links to all of those things if they want at smallhousefarm.com.
Awesome. And I'll include those links in the episode description once this comes out. And yeah, thank you again. Really happy that we can connect and do this, and wish you all the best. And would love to have you back on again too someday.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chris.
And for everybody else out there, thank you very much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.